The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronxtalk. Two black men were shot by police in Louisiana and Minnesota. Soon after, during the protests of those tragedies, 5 Dallas police officers were gunned down. And just the other day, 3 Baton Rouge police officers were ambushed and murdered. These events are all horrible and tragic, and the issues they open up are numerous. Police tactics and training, availability of gun, the nature of protests, and all with an undercurrent of racial division. We have 2 experts in criminal and social justice with us tonight to provide expert analysis. If you have questions or comments, then send an email to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org or post it on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. For the here and now, a former NYPD lieutenant and professor of criminal justice at Monroe College, it is Dr. Darren Porcher. Good evening. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
Nice to have you. And the executive director of the college's King Graduate School's Urban Research Institute, Dr. Basil Wilson. Nice to have you back, sir.
Good to be here, sir.
Dr. Porcher, let's start with you. Alton Sterling, killed by police in Baton Rouge. We have all seen the videos. I debated whether we wanted to show it again, but everybody has seen it. It certainly appeared that the police overreacted and simply gunned a man down. What's your take on the tactics used and what happened in that incident?
Well, when I worked in the NYPD, I worked in the Internal Affairs Bureau. And while working as a lieutenant in the Internal Affairs Bureau, I oftentimes investigated police-involved shootings. It's a very, and I want to start this out, use of force is always ugly. There's no way that I can package use of force and present it to people and they would say, okay, I'm okay with it. I look at that situation, one thing that I do see is you have 2 junior officers that are attempting to restrain Mr. Alton Sterling. The 2 officers respond on a call for a man with a gun that fits a specific description at a particular location. The officers respond on the scene, and that individual is apparently on the scene. I guess they engage in a level of dialogue. A taser is employed. A struggle ensues. Mr. Sterling is thrown to the floor. One officer is holding Mr. Sterling, I want to say, below his waistline. The second officer is atop Mr. Sterling, and he has his left arm restrained. However, the right arm is still free. The officer that's just below the waistline states gun, and that's when the officer that's positioned towards the head fires his weapon, fires several shots, fatally causing the death of Mr. Sterling.
Let me just interject. I think that is an accurate description of what happened. Right. I do think, having seen the video, so now the analysis of it.
Now, these cases, when they're presented, this shooting is going to be presented to a grand jury. They have an independent prosecutor that's going to prosecute or present this, to introduce this to the grand jury. One of the officers are going to state that their lives were in fear based on the right arm being free. And keep in mind,
and the fact that the other officer yelled gun.
Right. Our line of sight is very different than those officers that were on scene. I can't see, and there's an obstruction when you look at the struggle happens under by the driver's side fender of an automobile. Mm-hmm. I can't see if Mr. Sterling did reach for his gun or he didn't.
Although
However,
they did say there was no gun in his hands.
the gun was retrieved from his pocket. Keep in mind, we didn't see where the gun was when the officer made the statement that there was a gun on the scene. The officer saying that he saw a gun tells me he saw something that I didn't see, because this is my observation on television. These shooting investigations are very comprehensive, and there's a lot involved. I say that to say this. It's one of these things where we really can't rush to judgment and say this is what it is. Because, a case in point, I made mention on the Michael Brown shooting, for example. The world said that
both of you were on the show.
When everyone said that Officer Darren Wilson was an executioner, etc. And once again, I said the same thing. You have to take a step back, regress, and let the investigation take its course. Because I've been this road before as an investigator on these shootings, and it goes back to use of force is never pretty. It's always ugly. So that saying, I say that to say this. I think the public needs to regress and await what the findings of the grand jury are before they state that the officers were murderers. And because it appears to me on a surface level that this may be an abuse of force. However, we just need a more comprehensive overview of this before we can state that claim.
Dr. Wilson, two white cops wrestle a black man to the ground. One yells gun. It's a very volatile situation. What's your analysis of what you've heard?
I think we're in a new technological age in terms of policing. One thing that we do see is in many of these incidents, the incident has been videotaped. So there are millions of people looking at these incidents, and they understand reality.
Based on what they see
based
in
upon
those
what
videos.
we see. But
and actually, what Dr. Porcher brought up was very interesting, because that's the only angle the public has. It's not like a baseball game where you have three different angles of the slide to second base.
But
we don't know really what happened.
But
having said that,
the gentleman who owned the store said that the gun was in Alton Sterling's pocket. It's quite strange that the body cameras that were on the two police officers were no longer on them as they pinned down Alton Sterling, who was on his back. To me, one of the things that we must insist on is a high level of professionalism in police departments. There are police departments who do this exceptionally well. I think the Dallas Police Department, under the leadership of David Brown, has shown that with leadership, with excellent middle management oversight, that you can reduce police abuse of power, you can minimize the police use of deadly force, and you can ensure a higher level of professionalism amongst police officers. There are 18,000 police departments in this country. There are too many, and too many officers are poorly trained and lack a high level of professionalism. I think if we continue to apologize for things that are clearly obvious to the public, we run the risk of really people losing and not having seen the criminal justice system with a high level of legitimacy. In democratic society, it becomes terribly important for people to respect the people who represent the state and who represent criminal justice. Unless we can restore that legitimacy, we are in a sense pushing the society to a certain precipice from which we will see more and more unnecessary killings and racial tension.
Should we infer from your saying that your impression of the Dallas police force being run very well, that in Baton Rouge, where after this incident there was a lot of turmoil, and then absolutely tragically 3 police officers were gunned down, that maybe the climate or the training in Baton Rouge in that police force is not as good as Dallas, at least from your perspective?
From my perspective. And you see, I think we have a civilizational problem in the sense that we are presently devaluing life, both the life of police officers and the life of civilians. Any society that is worth really is moving towards democratic policing has to value life. We can't look at police officers and not recognize the importance of their lives. Police officers cannot look at the lives of civilians and devalue those lives. So what we really need is a restoration of the sacrosanct nature of human life.
Do you think
yeah.
I'm sorry, do you think those police officers, I don't want to leave that scene, the scene of that crime, for want of a better term, do you think that those police officers acted in that way either out of fear, they legitimately thought that they were in danger at that particular time, or they looked at that situation and had some prejudice and so their fear was heightened, or they simply were not trained well and did not use just good policing?
Well, it's clear to me that they were not professional.
You don't think they were professional?
No, but I think all police officers are entitled to due process. We have a criminal justice system where people are innocent until proven guilty. But I also think that, with exceptional training, with the capacity to de-escalate violence, with the ability to know how to make an arrest, we can in fact reduce these incidents significantly. We cannot have a society in which people are videotaping these incidents and then we spin around and say that what people have seen, they have not seen. That's just an absurdity that just cannot hold up.
Dr. Porcher, Philando Castile shot in Falcon Heights, Minnesota. I don't know if we need to go through that particular circumstance in detail again, but I'll ask it this way. Yet another black man is stopped by police. He even says that he has a gun. The situation ends up yet again with another black man who is shot by police. Without even evaluating that, can you understand why people may rush to judgment or may go out and protest and say, you know what, yet again, this is happening, this is a trend, this is a problem in America?
I want to be clear. I can understand the outrage in both incidents. Like, although I mentioned use of force is always ugly, I can understand the public's perception. The public does not investigate police shootings, and nor do I expect the public to be experts at analyzing a police shooting. When we look at what happened in connection with in Minneapolis, the filming occurred after the fact. Now, the passenger in the vehicle mentioned that, look, the deceased introduced a level of documentation and stated that he had a pistol permit, and she further stated that the gentleman informed the officer that he was going for his wallet. Now, as that scenario broadened and we heard more, then we found out that the real reason why the stop occurred was because this individual fit a description of a robbery suspect, which has been publicized. And are there similarities between the two? Yes. However, that doesn't mean that in no way, shape, or form should it result in someone losing their life. Anyone that commits a crime has a right to be treated accordingly. So the way I look at this situation is this. Could both instances could they have been done differently? And I believe so. It's really easy for me to say that sitting in this chair, but one of the key components to a felony car stop, an armed car stop, is you want to have the avid resources available to you. It shouldn't just be yourself and your partner. If you're pulling someone over that you perceived had been someone that committed a robbery, a gunpoint robbery, that's fine. Bring in additional units, because by bringing in additional units, it makes things safe for both yourself and that motorist that you're attempting to arrest. So from a tactical perspective, I felt that it was somewhat flawed.
Do you support the idea of police cameras, and do you welcome the fact that in just about every situation, if there are people around, somebody is going to videotape every arrest and certainly every difficult interaction with police? Is this a good turn of events for this society or not?
Well, I was a strong proponent for body cameras long before Eric Gardner. And just going back to what Basil mentioned earlier in connection with the body cameras being knocked off, one thing that is consistent, the way a body camera is attached to your uniform, if you're involved in a scuffle, it's going to come off. The body camera is, it's kind of like this microphone. And so if you're involved in this, engaged in any type of scuffle, that body camera is going to come off. The officer in Minneapolis did not have a body camera, but we did have an introduction of video by the passenger. I think that a body camera in that particular scenario would have provided us a lens to the encounter from the beginning to the end, as opposed to what we saw was merely a snippet. And the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association here in the NYPD did recently they put out a survey, and an overwhelming 70% of all police officers in the NYPD were in favor of body cameras. The reason being is it had the ability to introduce the narrative from beginning to end.
So the police had something to rely on if something happened.
Exactly.
Dr. Wilson, I read an article the other day which provided, I think it was on Vox.com. I mean, there's just so much out there, and you have a hard time, you know, determining what is opinion versus what is fact. Somebody wrote, on any given day in any police department in the nation, 15% of the officers will do the right thing no matter what is happening. 15% of the officers will abuse their authority at every opportunity. The remaining 70% could go either way depending on whom they are working with. Now, this feeds into what you were saying, for example, about if you compare, let's say, the Dallas police force versus the Baton Rouge police force. How do we move the needle on some of these things so that accepting what they say is true, but some of those 70%, then we can move that 15% up a little bit higher? Or is this just one of those things that you get a certain level of crime and you get a certain level of human nature in a police force are going to behave a certain way?
I think the research has shown, you know, there's a young man who's a graduate of Temple University. He taught for a couple of years at John Jay College. He has moved on by the name of Michael White, and he has done some research on police shootings and police behavior. What is critical in that is not just the external oversight, which is important, but also the role of the commissioner of police and middle management people within the police department. That makes up a fundamental difference in terms of how police officers function. Take, for example, the New York Police Department. When Patrick Murphy in the 1970s became the commissioner, long before Tennessee versus Ghana, he insisted that when a NYPD police officer used his gun, there had to be an investigation and made certain that that gun was, in fact, that those shots were fired legitimately. Right. So one of the things that, you know, when you look at, for example, NYPD, in 2010, there were over 12,000 complaints reported to the Civilian Complaint Review Board. In 2015, that has come down to 8,000, a reduction of about 36%. That has to do with Commissioner Kelly's leadership and Bratton's leadership. Bratton has taken a different approach. He has, in fact, reduced the amount of stop and frisk stops. He has, in fact, tried to emphasize a much more, or at least improve relationships between the community and policing. It's certainly not has arrived at maybe what I'd like to see, but there has been a marked improvement in terms of police-community relationships.
Can I ask you?
Yeah, sure. You're going to ask me? Or
well,
you're
no,
going to
ask
ask
you?
him?
You think
I don't
it
know.
was Bratton's leadership that caused the decrease in the stops?
Oh, I mean, there's no question. There's no question that de Blasio made it very clear that the sort of runaway stop and frisk that we had, that the American Civil Liberties Union.
Okay,
New
no,
York
I
City.
got it. Because this is what I think.
No,
because I don't think, I beg to differ. I think it was Floyd versus the city of New York. That lawsuit where John Schindling ruled that the NYPD was using stop and frisk at an inordinately high percentage in the African American and in the minority communities. And that was the cause of the change.
So you don't want to credit necessarily
No, absolutely
Bratton.
wasn't. It wasn't. It definitely wasn't.
No,
It was that. Hear me out.
Yeah.
That was something that came up. And then it was a combination of that and what we refer to as the Ferguson effect. When you look at what FBI Director Comey mentioned in connection with how police officers have now regressed based on their fear of being persecuted by the public. after the death of Michael Brown. It was a combination of those two things. In no way, shape, or form do I see it as a de Blasio issue, because the lawsuit came into play, and that's why they stopped the numbers.
But I think
that's why the number
no,
stops
but I think we have a number of things going on. The city council also stepped in and insisted that there should be an inspector general in terms of stop and frisk, as how it was being utilized.
But it was the lawsuit.
There's no question that even despite the lawsuit, that there was a mayoralty election in New York City, and Bratton was brought in with the understanding that we would take a constitutional approach to stop and frisk.
I do think it was I mean, in some ways, in some ways, it doesn't matter what was the cause of it, although the numbers that you quoted were very interesting. My thought when you brought it up was that it was a myriad of things. What I want to get to is one more question about training. There's this idea of implicit bias training, where they want to start at least acknowledging that maybe every one of us has biases in the way we behave, and try and educate police officers in that way. Is there a level of that going on in the police force, and is that the direction we need to go, so that we don't have the repetitive thing that yet again white cops shooting a black?
I was an instructor in the academy for a number of years, and implicit bias was never a block. It was never a block of instruction that was introduced to recruit training.
Right.
As of lately, there's a federal monitor that's been brought into the NYPD, and that was a suggestion by the federal monitor that there should be a block of instruction in connection with implicit bias.
Are they doing that now?
It's now being employed, but the issue with that is, and we all have an implicit bias, whether we like it or not.
Right.
It's just based on our cultural experiences moving forward. But I'm sorry, Gary. Did you want?
Okay. No, go ahead.
Okay. But what the NYPD really needs to do in terms of the implementation of this implicit bias block of training is they need to put it out, they need to roll it out, and then they need to reevaluate it maybe a month or two later. And then after that month or two later,
see what the effect is?
Right. Then they may need to retool the strategy so they can quantify if this is working or not.
Dr. Wilson, your thoughts on implicit bias training?
Well, I think there's a need for that, definitely, as we become more and more a diverse society. But one of the things that you're seeing also is that police departments in many parts of the country are in fact becoming diverse. Now, because the police department becomes diverse, that doesn't necessarily mean that there will not be unnecessarily use of deadly force. What I think, and what I'm finding disturbing, is that we are on a precipice in terms of this madness of the present interpretation of the Second Amendment. This proliferation of open and carry states are endangering the lives of police officers.
And the police officers are admitting that.
And they're endangering the lives of civilians. So I think we have to take a second look at the Second Amendment in terms of when we move towards concealed weapons, when we presume that everybody has a right to carry an AR-15, we have to reimpose the assault rifle ban, which was a law in 1994 and was not renewed in 2004. So we need to return to a level of sanity in terms of gun ownership and in terms of who can own semi-assault rifles.
Speaking of insanity, the idea that protesters or somebody, however legitimate, I would think illegitimate, have now shot 8 police officers allegedly in retaliation for these killings of black men in Louisiana and in Minnesota. We were talking before the show about the fact that these were 2 former military men,
yes,
so in many ways, the society has bred them to be killers. What are your thoughts about the horrible tragedies of police officers being gunned down?
I mean, I think it's something that is totally unacceptable.
Is it related to the protests, or are these so-called lone gunmen?
I think where we are in the society at this juncture is that if you compare what is happening to the 1960s, in the 1960s, we had a commitment to a philosophical, non-violent movement. We're in a different age. Even though crime has declined precipitously since the 1990s, we have a lot of deranged people. We have a lot of people who are being socialized in terms of social media, in terms of crackpot internet services. So, and with the access now to AR-15s and to these, assault rifles, we're in a different age. So we have to return and to understand what is the age we're living in, how do we protect police officers, and how do we protect civilians. And one way is to reimpose the assault rifle ban and to get rid of many of these laws and this interpretation of the Second Amendment, which was propagated by Scalia. We need to move away from the Scalia interpretation of the Second Amendment and have a much more restricted and sane interpretation of the Second Amendment. We are now a highly urbanized society. We are not a frontier society. We are not a rural society. And if we are going to protect life, we've got to make certain that the state legislatures and the federal government pursue policies that, in fact, enhance human life rather than endanger human life.
Dr. Porcher, as a result of these, do you think police officers right now are more afraid? Because I mean, these are ambushes. The one in Louisiana is being called that. The one in Dallas was...
Both of them are ambushes.
Both of them are ambushes, fair enough. Do you think police officers, for a horrible, ironic term to use, will be gun shy? Will say, you know what, maybe we ought to step back and not do our jobs as well, or be a little more cautious when they get into volatile situations?
What's happening, and
we got about a minute, and then
I've interviewed numerous officers on this, and officers in the NYPD see the same correlation as to what happened with Officers Lou and Ramos in Brooklyn, where they were gunned down. The same scenario. Police are now far more vigilant. They're not as buried. Their heads are not buried in their phone. And even the department has come down with a series of directives in that, as of now, there's no more solo patrols. Officers must be doubled up. The level of vigilance right now is at its peak, and officers are not looking to regress from committing to police work. They still want to serve the communities. However, they just want to do it in a more vigilant means.
Gentlemen, I'm going to assert that if we could have more dialogues like this, inform the public about what's going on in police stations and in precincts and in the minds of police officers, and getting good analysis, maybe we'll have a better society, and that's why we try to do what we do. Dr. Darren Porcher from Monroe College, thank you. Dr. Basil Wilson from the King Graduate School at Monroe College, thank you. And folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on the show tonight, or anything going on in the Bronx, send us an email to bronxtalk@bronxnet.org, or put it on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. We ask you to like the Bronx Talk Facebook page, and you can check out our archives at bronxnet.org. Bronx Talk is on the lower right navigation bar. You can see it there. Thanks to our producer, Jayla Juberis, also to director Shirley Arietta, to the cast of thousands that surround us, to you, to them. See you next week.
Hey, I'm Darren Jaime. I'm the host of Wednesday's Open right here on BronxNet Television, Channel 67, and also on Verizon Files, Channel 33. Want to invite you every Wednesday. You get an opportunity to see what's going on in the world of news, current events, debates, public information. That's what happens here on Open every Wednesday. So we invite you to join us right here on BronxNet Television.